Can you? All right, well, welcome everyone to the Setting Up a Cooking Lab and Piloting a Kitchen Lending Library. And I'm from Mass Farm to School. My name is Dinah Mack. I'm the Education Program Manager, and I help to program learning opportunities for educators and food service individuals and all school staff. And so thank you for joining us for this one. And if you don't know Mass Farm to School, we do a lot of work with local farms and fisheries and schools to promote healthy communities and increasing local food purchasing and education at schools. So we're really excited to be learning today about piloting a kitchen lending library. And you can get involved with Mass Farm to School in a lot of ways. Our Harvest of the Month program, coming to these professional development opportunities. We have a lot of networking opportunities throughout the year. And so you can see more about what we do on our website. And I'm very excited to introduce Anna Cynar. And Anna has been an educator for 11 years and is currently teaching at Innovation Academy Charter School for the past 6 years. And I always learn so much from Anna when I hear her speak. She teaches biology and sustainable food systems and runs a farm to school internship and a turtle conservation internship. And is also the farm to school co-coordinator and science department coordinator. And IACS is, the school is 5th to 12th grade. I can't pronounce the name of this.
Okay. We go IX is kind of the abbreviation.
It's Tingsboro, Mass. And there are 100+ students in each grade. So I'm going to turn this over to Anna. And if you have any questions while Anna's presenting, you can throw them in the chat or just raise your hand, and then we can hit those questions at the end. All right, take it away.
Sure, thank you. So my hope for our agenda, but we're a small group, so I can tweak this if people are like, I want to hear about this thing and not this other thing, we can move things around. So please just let me know and unmute. But I wanted to first introduce you to a little bit of what programming looks like at our school, so you can kind of sense where our kitchen lending library and our cooking labs take place. I thought it would be helpful if there's anyone here who's thinking of setting up cooking in the classroom during the school day, what that has looked like for us, and suggestions and advice and some routines that we found have been successful. And then scaling up from that, what the kitchen lending library looks like. And my goals are to provide you with tips and structures to do cooking-based activities in your programming, and then ideas of how you might start an equipment lending program and the resources and supports we've used that you might model or shift in any way. So I'm going to share the introduction to programming regardless, but just Alyssa, just hearing you being the food service, are you interested in hearing about the cooking lab setup in the classroom or just the kitchen lending library? And Anna, if you want to chime in, that would be great too.
Both. I mean,
Okay.
we have schools that do both. So I was just interested in what
Sure.
you're doing to see if
Okay.
it's something that we could offer to our school system.
Okay, great. So I'll just go through, but again, if people are like, move on, then I can do that. So Diana, can you go to the next slide? So just a little bit about what some of our cooking-based programming looks like at our school within the academic school day for credit courses. Again, we're a 5 through 12. A lot of this sits currently in our high school. That's where I operate out of mainly. So we have a dual enrollment sustainable food system class for 11th and 12th graders, where they cook every other week in connection to the units that we're doing. I run a farm to school internship. This year it's during the school day and it's for credit science course. In the past, it's been outside of school. I think it will be switching back next year to outside of school, but they do cooking. And in that program this year, we're piloting Harvest of the Month program, but it's all internship runs. So they pick the recipes, they cook all the recipes, they serve it, they plan all the activities. So the cooking kits and things you see, they're using that in them every month to support the Harvest of the Month. At our school, we have something called senior projects last semester, where students explore a topic of their interest and see it through into an application piece. And so a lot of them might use some of the equipment from our lending library and our kitchen space. And then enrichment during our school day on Wednesdays, the middle school has an enrichment block, and there's my co-coordinator for farm to school is doing things there with hydroponics, and there'll be cooking elements where they use this equipment. You'll see on the schedule I have here for our high school, you'll see this choice block, the last period there. And that's a time where students and staff can pitch enrichment ideas that happen within the school day. So we usually do cooking-based ones that, again, we use this equipment and space for. And then the very last week of school, we kind of change our schedule, walls down, as they say, and do enrichment trips for multiple days. And so again, that's another place where the things you're going to see are happening and being used in our programming. So equipment gets a lot of use within those. And then if you could go to the next slide. And then besides those sort of more formal ways, the other way we use them, this will be when we talk about the kitchen lending library, is we work and consult with other classes. So for instance, you can see this organizer, and I have links to docs and things, but just an example of the collaborations that I do with other classes to help them use the equipment. Because we found if I just say, hey, I have all this equipment you can use, that's not really enough to get people started or help them feel supported. So we do consulting along with that. So for instance, there's this math class this semester that is going to use our cooking stuff for a project they're doing around scaling up recipes and ratios and fractions and things like that. And they'll be cooking those recipes and selling the food, and all of our equipment will help support that. So Spanish courses a lot of times will borrow our equipment, so we help support them. There's a class this semester called Spill the Tea, which is an English class are based around books that connect to tea. And so they're using some of the equipment. So we try to support different teachers and classes with that. And then in the summer, we do a summer program called Beats and Eats. 5th through 12th, there's different sessions and they use the equipment too. So just giving kind of a view of the space that we have and the equipment we have and the places that it might have been utilized in. So any questions about any of that before we kind of see what we have and how we run it? And welcome, Maggie. Okay. Awesome. So we can go to the next slide. All right. So what I thought we could do, and this is, I thought might be a working document because we might all have different experiences in the room of trying to cook within the classroom, which is very different than, other spaces, because I personally don't have my own classroom. So I'm sharing the space with other teachers. So how you get in and get out and move to the next classes, those a huge learning curve. So this is the picture of the room and the space that I'm currently in on a cooking lab day. And you can see there's all sorts of stuff in there. There are 2 other teachers that share this space with me. So I have to be able to set this up and break it down pretty fast before the next class. And if you could click on that link and then drop it into the chat, that's hyperlinked there. And then, yeah, if it goes in the chat, then everyone will be able to edit and comment it as well. So if you have ideas or things you want to add, or if you want to unmute, we can add them to this doc. But I just wanted to go through kind of the progression or order of how I thought or started cooking for anyone who's maybe starting from scratch, or maybe it's a resource that might support other folks in doing this work. And if you have other ideas or insights and thoughts, we can do that. If I can share my screen, Dinah, I can open it too. Let's see.
Oh, I got it, Anna. I had to unshare to.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Okay. So now you should all have that doc. Do you want that doc open?
Yeah. That'd be awesome. Okay, so just kind of thinking about the process, and this is a draft and so just some things that you need to think about. Obviously, if you're cooking in the classroom, first thing that you might need to do is check in about who in the building you need to talk about cooking food in the classroom. Different schools have really different regulations around this, and so that's really important to come to agreement, like if that's even possible at your school. So that might be for you, your nurse, your food service folks, facilities, if you have a wellness committee or administration. And for us, it meant having agreements about what foods could be cooked in a classroom and what foods they didn't feel okay with. So things like peanuts, and so we don't cook with anything like that. So that's a great thing to kind of open the door is if your administration is leery of it, or even if your nurse and wellness folks are leery about having that conversation about, well, what would you feel comfortable with? What level would be okay to start off with, and building that kind of trust and seeing that works, and then expanding that more. And I encourage starting out small. So when we started cooking, I was in a room that didn't have any running water or wasn't near a sink or anything. We didn't have any cooking equipment really. I had some knives and some cutting boards. So we made vegetarian sushi that didn't involve any kind of heating or things like that. So that was really easy to do in the classroom. We made pesto, which was really, really easy to do with a food processor. And we made, for one of our units, we made brownies using cricket flour for a unit around insects. And I just brought in a toaster oven. So it was very small scale, just bringing one thing in for a day. And then if you can't cook in the classroom, outdoors being an option if you have a portable stove. So I'll show what that looks like. But there are ways to cook if your admin says no, ways to do it outside and maybe work that way to build trust. That could be a whole conversation about how you get your admin on board. But let's say that you did get them on board. And if you have any choice or say, then thinking about your room selection, again, if you have some choice in that. So some things that, there's lots of advice, but things that I'm like, oh, I had to be mindful of is having a space that has access to outlets near tables is really important if you're kind of going to the next level. If you can, getting proximity to hot water access is really helpful. The first 2 classrooms I was in, there weren't any sinks in the room, so we were able to send students to the bathrooms to wash their hands and things like that. But in the current room I am, we have a sink, which is really nice. If there's any say when you're thinking about flooring, maybe picking a room that doesn't have carpet, so it's better for cleaning up would be great. If possible, somewhere where there's ventilation if something burns. My classroom currently, all the windows are sealed, so we get to grace the halls with our scents. But that's something to think about if you have power over that. So again, this is super informal. So if other people have other ideas, if you have thoughts about how you talk to admin or a room selection or things like that, please, you can type right in this doc. It's editable. You can add in your other things, or if you want to put something in the chat or unmute. And then the other thing when I started doing this is thinking about scheduling. Again, we have different levels of input and how much we can give to scheduling depending on a department. But some things you want to think about is how many students you feel comfortable having in a space. And your limits are going to be equipment, and there might be class limits that your school already sets. But that's going to be important. For me right now, I cook with 20 students in a class at a time. But I could certainly, I think at this point with the equipment I have, up that to 24. So I think that's what we'll do next year. And then if you can think about timing of the day, I don't want to be annoying, Dinah, but is there a way to go back to the slide that has the schedule? Thank you. So every school is going to be different if you're elementary or high school, but we're on the schedule here where our blocks rotate every day. And I teach my cooking classes mainly D block. So Monday, last period, Wednesday, second period, and Friday, third period. And I advocated for that strategically over time so that, let's say we have a cooking lab and they're done cooking, but the equipment still needs to cool, or there's a little bit of cleanup. Then I don't have to stress out about another class coming in last period on Monday. It's like we're the last ones and I can do some wrap up there. And same thing, like Wednesday, you'll see there's this long pass. That's 15 minutes of a break that we have. So that gives me some time to set up some things before the class comes in. So anything you can be strategic about. I usually find like last class of days or anywhere there might be a break to set up is helpful if you have any power in that, so that you can alleviate that. The Friday morning is rough. So if you can avoid, I think, mornings, because kids come late to school, especially in high school, if they're driving themselves, if that's your audience. And so if they're coming in 30 minutes late and you're trying to make a meal, that it doesn't go very well. So I try to be strategic about the days that we're cooking and the timing. So something to think about if you have any power in that piece. You can go back to that doc. Cool. And then other things really important to think about is equipment storage. So I'm going to show you in the slides in a moment, but my first year, actually, can we go to that? So Diana, I'm going to be really annoying. I apologize. There's a slide that we haven't seen yet that has a picture of, so you just want to keep clicking through. Number 8. So the first year that I did cooking, we didn't have any kits or anything like that. We cooked 3 times and they're small things. But the second year we started cooking every other week, and I was in a shared space with 3 other teachers. So it was in and out, like it wasn't my space. So what I ended up doing is I got a bunch of plastic tubs. I had 5 because I have 5 cooking groups, and I gave them all a color. And this sheet here And this kind of gives you a clue of what we had for our first setup was what was in each kit. So this is kind of the bare minimum that we used, and we did all of our cooking labs using these things. So every group had a tablecloth that we covered the tables with, some towels, peeler, paring knives, chef knives, cutting gloves we'll talk about, and cutting boards. They had induction stove top, cooking pot, cooking pan, oven mitts, colander, baking stuff, and you can see kind of the tools there, and they're all in their tub. And each one I used markers that are paint markers, and every piece of equipment in their tub I colored with that thing. So there's the purple group, the blue group, the orange group, whatnot. And so they were responsible for the beginning of cooking to inventory that they had all their stuff really quickly in their group of 5. We'd cook. We didn't have any sinks or washing things in that room, so they'd put them in tubs. I was able to work with food service. They allowed us one day after school, we picked a day that was not stressful for them, where I'd wheel down the things on a cart of the dirty dishes and we'd run it through the Hobart after school. And then I'd bring them back down to the class. In the next class, the students would put everything back in their box that matched their color. So it was a way to make sure they had all their cooking equipment. We were able to cook, even though we didn't have a dishwasher or anything like in that room because of that partnership. And so that's kind of a model we use there. Maybe that's something that might work for you. If you have a very transient spot where you don't have like a lot of your own space and a lot of your own setup, as a suggestion. So I don't know if anyone had questions about that, but that's how we were originally doing this, is with our kind of color model. So you can see on some of these tools, you'll see like the blue dot. So that was the blue groups, or you can see this orange line on this grader. So that belonged to their group. So it was a good way to manage this. The room I'm currently in, I have a few shelves, so I'll show you that system. So this is what you can see here. So again, like this is not only my room. So up here is like engineering stuff. So I have 3 shelves. It's very exciting over here. And so things are a little bit more permanent, and I'll show you, but kind of we build progressively for students to know where things are and find them themselves. I have them out on their tables at the beginning of the year, and by the end, they're going to these things and grabbing all their stuff. So it reduces my need to set things up and that stress there, and everything's labeled with signs on the shelves and in the cabinets that are here. So I don't have to do the tub method anymore. I got moved to a classroom that has a dishwasher and a sink and a fridge. So we're really lucky in that way. But I wanted to show you those other ways to be like, you don't need these things to cook. Like there are ways to do that if you can problem solve and collaborate with your other teams at your school. Can we go back to that doc then? Okay, so thinking about storage. So I have the shelves and things that you just saw in the picture and behind me. And those are things we use every week. And then there's some specialty equipment, like we don't use griddles every week or things like that, or the tortilla presses. So I have a little storage in the basement. I worked out with facilities where those things are. And I have a cart that I wheel them up if I need them for a class, but that's more rare to kind of need those things. So that's how I've thought about that. But really important if you're starting out, like where are you going to put your stuff is really important in terms of those systems. So let's say you got permission from admin, you have some sort of space, you come up with your system of like where things are going to go, and you're starting your program, your class, whatever that is. Really important to check in with their caregivers. I know our nurses, if your school has a nurse, not all schools do, have those health records and things like that. But what I found is sometimes families don't put on the form all of their full allergies and things because they're like, they never would be exposed to that at school. And so sometimes families are really good about putting everything out there, but people have told me, oh, I didn't put that because why would you be encountering that? So this link, if you click on it, is an example of the syllabus for my food system class. And I have links at the end to all these docs, so you'll be able to grab them all and hyperlink. But if you can scroll like maybe down to the last page-ish. So this has the syllabus, but it also has the form. So it's going to be a long journey down there. Next page after this will be the one. Okay. So just you can see as an example that you might model if you want, is I have students and their families fill this out at the very beginning. So there's a description you can see there about, we cook and students are trained on the equipment, but do you feel comfortable having them cook in class? I have this in here. If we switch to hybrid, are they okay with their student cooking at home? any allergies or dietary restrictions. I want to make sure that I have that too, that double safety check, because I'm responsible for them, and then if you keep scrolling down, it'll say like, I have fully recognized, seen this and appreciate the risk of cooking in rooms, working with knives and heat. I think that conversation is really important to have with families, and making sure that they've notified me of those things or anything that's helpful for cooking in the classroom. So this is something that goes out to families the first week of class, that we go over, and we don't start cooking until I get those. And so there's many forms out there like this. This is an example if it's helpful for you. Again, you'll have this linked here too.
Anna, what if you have a student whose caregiver says, no, they're not comfortable? Is the student going to?
Great question. I don't know. I've never had that happen. I think for that class, so I think if it's one of the classes I'll explain that we're supporting, then we would come up with an alternative. But I think if for this class, and it's not a required class to graduate or anything like that, and this is a food systems class, I think we probably ask them to pick a different class for that. But we can talk about when we get to like when I'm going in and supporting other classes. If they didn't feel comfortable, then of course we have to come up with an alternative because they're part of that curriculum and they deserve that space for that. But that's a great question. And then just important, depending, and maybe other people have other things that you want to share that are helpful for like the setup. But for me, what's been really important, and fully admit there's been some tense moments, like who wants to be with the teacher that like making the room messy and smelly like all the time, and like, is having conversations about, how you're going to norm in that space is really important. And thinking about what kind of activities can happen on the tables, because I need to, like, we clean the tables, but I can't have like a full-blown bacterial lab, for science in here in the same space. So we have to have agreement about what are okay materials and activities to have in this space that we're both sharing, to say that we feel as comfortable being food safe. So that's been interesting. And then agreements about cleanup. So if something, happens and I have to go to the next class and we push stuff aside, like how long is it okay to leave that stuff out there, before it needs to go away, and what are the agreements around that? Or let's say we cook something and the oven is still cooling and their class is coming in next, where are we going to put the oven to cool so that everyone feels safe and comfortable in the room? So those are conversations that are important to have. We have systems for that, and signs and carts for like if there's something still cooling, a device that's away from the rest of the class, so everyone feels good with that. So, but that's definitely been something that maybe is specific to my situation, but I don't know. So is there anything people would add or want to say, like, and you'll see the rest of the doc, but just some things to think about when you're planning what stakeholders you might need to talk to, or those kind of initial, before you buy all your equipment and you get going with that, because we'll talk about that next. Okay, I'll just assume then that you're all still here. Okay. Yeah.
Want me to scroll down on the doc?
Yeah, that would be great. Okay. So the next thing I want to talk about, and I'm going to show you a list of what we have in our room and share, and I'm going to highlight a few things. But if there's anything you want to talk about purchasing or things like that, I'm happy to talk more in depth about them. I have no brand loyalty to anything. Like the things I share are just the things that we have or whatnot. But obviously you're going to think about your scale. Are you going to do demos with your students and they're all sharing and cooking together as one big group? Are you going to do small groups, those sorts of things? Again, for me, I found the best is 4 people tend to have enough jobs for the cooking we do so that they're all engaged. Any more than that, there's like kids wandering around and losing interest. So we're lucky enough to be able to do that. And obviously what you want to cook is going to influence what kind of equipment that you're going to get. And obviously your budget, we'll talk about kind of how we've gotten our funding a little bit later. And how much time you want to invest, because if you buy equipment, you need to manage it and you need to clean it and like and store it. So that's a time commitment. So what is your level of wanting to do that? So again, I talked about before about starting small with things like, veggie sushis and pestos or things like that, where you don't need a lot of equipment. You don't need sinks in the room. You can just have one set and do those things. But I have the material list. Oh, I think there's a link I'm going to drop in the chat to share for that part there. Okay. To help people kind of see what equipment we have, I'm going to share this doc. I'll put it in the chat. And this is what we use for a cooking lending library. And I'll explain this process a little bit later, but Dinah, if you see that in the chat, and anyone can click on that if you want.
Do you want me to open that in the chat?
Yeah. that's the link to our equipment. So I'll talk this process is for our cooking lending library, but you'll be able to see here if you scroll through the things that we have available. Our interns, our farm to school interns came up with the categories. See, don't forget the basics, and there's things like spice kits and knife gloves and all sorts of things. Getting fancy tableware, so we have plates and spoons and chopsticks and things like that. I see sharp things, so all our different knives and peelers and graters and whatnot that we have available, chopping it up. So we got immersion blenders and food processors and things like that. Mix it and flip it. So all of the different tools for the that it's getting hot in here, which are all of our heat related things, and measure and baking. So these are the different things that are in our space that we use for cooking in the classes, and then in the lending library, and the super most funnest things. So things like tortilla presses and what a grain mill and the pasta maker. So the real fun things. So this is the list of things that we have available to use in our classes, and then for the lending library. But the ones that I wanted to point out and talk about, and then if there's anything on here that anybody wants to talk about, let me know, is first about knives and knife gloves. So Dinah, if you could go to the setting up a cooking lab, the slides again. And then we should see a slide coming up with some gloves and cool. Okay. So every school is going to have different comfort levels, and one of those things might be around the knives and the chopping part. And so for our cooking labs, on the first cooking lab and during our camps, or when we loan out gear to teachers, the requirement is that students wear a knife glove. And so you can see here, we have everything, because we're 5 through 12. We have everything from extra small child, because some of those fifth graders have very small hands, to extra large adult, that they have to wear for the first one, at least in my cooking class as well. And then if they demonstrate safety and comfort, then that can be lost later in other groups. But like if I'm doing the fifth grade cooking camp, they have the glove all week for what we're doing. But that's something just I wanted to point out, that we use, that maybe something to think about if you haven't done programming, or having a conversation with your admin or families about what that looks like. And then I have a picture here, and I have them too, our different knives, and you'll see I gave a link to, because knife safety is a really important one. So I have all my slides and rollout on how we do the knife safety and food safety piece, that I'll show you in a moment. But we have, for students with small hands and some of our fifth graders, if they feel uncomfortable, this knife here, which is pretty cool because you put your fingers here and you have here, and it's a really rounded tip here. And so it's a small knife for people with small hands, and has a lot of control, and it's like a beginner knife. So it also has a shield, which I forgot to take a picture of, that you put on this hand. So when they're cutting, it kind of guards their hand. So we use these sorts of knives, or as an option for students. I do have some high schoolers who use this depending on their knife comfort. And so I show them all the knives, no judgment. We show them how they work, and we practice and things like that by making spring rolls. And then they're always there to pick which ones they want. And then you can kind of see here our medium knife. I'd say most students pick this one in terms of size, and all the stuff is kind of on the material list if you want to see. And then we have our larger chef knives with these sheaths here. So we have different options depending on students' comfort, and the size of their hands, and their age too. And then the crinkle cutter, which I recommend everyone get because they're very fun. So those are some things about knives. And then the other two pieces of equipment I wanted to point out, just talk about it seems pretty basic, but these cloths, these are our tablecloths. And I have linked in the brand that we use for them. And I'll show you the process of how we set up cooking labs. But students will spray down the table, they wash their hands, and then we put these coverings over them. That's kind of one of the requirements for cooking, to cover that, because we have different classes coming in all the time. We want to keep everyone safe. And this is it's linen on this side, and it has a flexible kind of waterproof coating on this side. And so we put them on the tables, and then they're washable. And they're very durable and flexible. So we use them every time we cook, and they're really cute patterns. So you can see that on there. So I'm really like, I love this piece of thing. It's like pretty important, again, to keep everyone protected from what we have on the tables and what is on the table. And then the last thing I wanted to point out is the induction cooktops that we use. I know a lot of schools, if they're going to do things and they don't have like a kitchen set up in their space, is one of these. So this is what we use. Again, I'm not a brand manager, but it's just the one that we have. And we have 6 of them, and they plug in. And what's cool is you have to make sure you have cookware that works with it. But once a student lifts something off of it, it turns off. So then they cool pretty fast. So there's no like, oh, I forgot to turn that thing off, and then they walk away. Like, so I really like that feature of these, but those are pretty cool too. Did anyone want to talk about, we've lost a lot of people. I guess I bored people. I don't know. Anna, you want to anything you want to talk about equipment or things with, or you're still good? Okay, great. So going back to the like things to think about when you're starting a cooking classroom, that Doc Dinah, if you want to hop back over there.
Getting there.
Yeah. You'll see again, there's a link to where we got the tablecloths, which is pretty fun. That one we can close and perfect. So you can see the link there. And then other things, just if you haven't thought about this, because I didn't, but it was important, like if you're writing grants and asking for funds, getting tubs for storage is really important. Anything you can use for storage containers. Having an ample supply of hair ties is a really important thing for students, and Band-Aids, not so much because they get injured, but if they come with cuts from like athletics or things like that, or whatever, I don't know what happens, but like if they have an injury that they come in with so that they're closed off before they start cooking. Other things I hadn't thought about when I was writing grants originally, like dishwashing, detergent, cleaning products, like all of those things are really important. And then like Ziploc bags and containers. You can never have enough of those. So that's that part there. Cool. And then if you could keep scrolling on that doc.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, you're good. Okay, thinking about your systems, really important to have a place where you lock up your sharp things, and your knives in particular. That I don't have a sign on in the room of where those are, because there's all sorts of people who move in and out of the space, so I'm not the only one. And that was definitely something the co-teacher who shares the room I'm in was nervous about. So whether that's a filing cabinet with a lock or whatever that is, finding something that you can lock that in. I recommend having a cart somewhere so that that's what we use. If things are cooling, we put them on that and we wheel them to the side of the room so they're out of the way, or just to haul things around is really important. But you'll want to think about those things, like how are you going to haul things out? Like if you buy a bunch of groceries and you're on the 3rd floor, like how are you going to get stuff there? So a wagon or something like that is helpful. And then maintenance and repair. I haven't had to do too much of that, but very fascinating. We've had these stoves for 4 years. And they now make this sound that I can't hear because my ears are old apparently. And all the high school students can hear it. And they're like, what is that ringing? And it's these stoves. So at least I know by the 4th year, these seem to make some noise that they notice and I don't. So I don't know what that means if they're dying, but there's that. And then for food storage. So when we started, we didn't have any refrigeration like to put stuff in, so I just put things in the staff lounge. That was interesting, but now we have a refrigerator. And then also thinking about what are you going to do with leftovers after? Is that something students are going to take home? Are you going to put them in your staff lounges to give away to staff? Having containers for those too. I think I'm going to go through this last part really quick, but other things, obviously, you think of flow of the room. If you're going to do composting, how are you going to wash all your stuff, and laundry? That's a big thing. I have to take my stuff home and wash. So that's something to think about. All our aprons, all our towels, all our gloves. Every week I'm washing those things. We're trying to get the school to get a washer and dryer, not just for us, but for athletics. So if you can pair like your needs and find the other people who have the same needs, that's a great suggestion for that. Signs, I have linked here the signs for all the stuff in the room if anyone wants to grab those. I also have in the links, you'll see our grouping survey of like how I pair groups and inventory. The last thing I want to share on here before we switch over to the cooking library is things when you start off with your students is doing norming around eating and like trying the food that they make. And that's going to look different everywhere, but is it a challenge by choice for you? Like you don't have to try it if you don't want to. Are you going to do everyone needs to take a no thank you bite? Having those conversations around not yucking other people's yums, like all of those norms are important to have conversations about. Some things we've done that have been successful with that is starting by doing progressive tasting where students get cucumbers or carrot, tomatoes, but mainly I don't like tomatoes, so mainly cucumbers, and add salt or sugar to them, or an acid like a lemon, and see how it changes the flavor profile of a tomato or a cucumber, and be like, right, so you might not have liked the food in this form, but when we added this, you did start to like that. And we can like any food if it's prepared a certain way. We just need to find the way that works for us. So not ruling out a food just because we had it once one way and we don't like it. Those are still conversations that I have all the time with 11th and 12th graders. And so doing that early and being like, how can we adjust this food so you like it, and opening up the receptiveness to trying different foods is a big thing. And then having group conversations if they're cooking in a group about what their food aversions are, or like the spicy level that group wants to cook with is important. For sake of time, you'll get this, you all have this, is you'll see how I do my cooking routines at the beginning of end of class, like what they do, how we did our knife safety. So you're welcome to take that if that's helpful. And also what cooking reflections look like after cooking labs there. And the last thing I'll say on this part is just being mindful of what you really need to explicitly teach and previewing each skill, whether that's your demoing it, they're watching videos or visuals, and the things that you just wouldn't expect. So things like how to clean a dish, how to load a dishwasher. We can't expect that our students know how to do that. Or, again, even by 11th and 12th grade, they might have very different ideas of what clean is than you do. So really being explicit about those things is really important. So that's there. So anything on just like how we do like in a class, run a cooking lab, hopefully there's something from there that's helpful for you, whether it's, some of the equipment that we use or some of the setup or anything like that.
And this is just a wealth of information, so much detail and so many resources. What's a no thank you bite?
It means that we're all going to try a bite, and then if we don't like it, then we can say no thank you. And I'm not forcing you to eat an entire plate of whatever it is, but we're at least going to try a bite. Would it be cool if you eat the whole thing? Yes, but we're not gonna make a judgment on it before we've even tried it. And so that's where some of that progressive tasting I think is really important. And really talking about in the first few weeks, if this is something you're going to be doing ongoing for a class, like where do our ideas of what tastes good and doesn't taste good comes from, and talking about exposure to different foods and our cultures and like so many different things that affect that, and really exploring that idea I think is really helpful to set that foundation to have those conversations. Because otherwise you're going to find yourself really frustrated, and I still do sometimes, is like, all right, we spent a lot of work buying all the food for this and getting all the equipment, and if you're going to make this thing and then you're going to dump it all in the compost, like it's going to make me want to cry if this happens continually. So how do you start off with the foundation that's going to help you avoid that as much as possible?
Do your students come up with this? You might be hitting this in a little while, but I'm just wondering, do the students come up with what you're going to cook in the recipes? Or
It depends on the class. So like if we're learning about a specific culture or a specific theme, and there's a food that connects to that's significant for some reason. So during our African foodways unit, we make black-eyed peas fritters because we were learning about the significance of black-eyed peas, and we're using a recipe that was really important as they were braiding black-eyed pea seeds into their hair when they're taken from their lands in Africa and enslavement into the United States. Like that's a set recipe because we're learning an intentional thing through that. But then there are other times where they're designing or picking, if they're doing something like a school lunch challenge and they're trying to redesign the school meal, like they have more say on that. So it really depends on what the goal is for something like that. Cool. So now that you've kind of seen like some suggestions of that, I would love to talk about how we're starting a cooking lending library with our staff. So if we kind of keep going to the next slide, and this just shows you before we move on, and I have the slides, like I project on the screen what it looks like to get cooking ready. And the first 1 or 2 times we do it, I have to coach students through it. And by now we're in April. sometimes I walk in the room and they've already done that stuff and they're waiting there like to cook, which is like the dream. You're trying to like have them do the thing so that you like are self-sustaining and they're independent. And this changes, every day. And I have like, when we're done, the cooking cleanup and I project, but you have all these slides if you want to modify anything and stuff like that, if that's helpful for anyone. Okay, so we have all this equipment. We're like, well, so we use this every other week and for these different programs, but there's a lot of times where it's not used, and we want to have as many people in the building as possible have access to this equipment. So how do we do that? And so 2 years ago, we started this program. You'll see this email. This is from one of the Spanish teachers who started using the lending library. And this is the email she sent out to her families and that class before they started cooking. But how we started this is we had a PD day where we invited any teachers or staff. It doesn't have to be classroom teachers. It could be enrichment teachers, sports coaches, anyone who's involved with the building that wants to do cooking with their group. I invited them to a professional development when we were in this room, and it was also a community building day. And so we made what's the winter? So we made a carrot butternut squash soup, I think. And they learned all about the space, what the stuff was in here. I taught them like they were students so they could see how we do the knife safety and the language, and I gave them all the slides. And we went through like tips for working with students, because I went through it like they were students. The farm to school interns helped with it. And so they got an introduction to some food safety things they need to keep in mind if they want to cook using the things in the library, and went through the training so that we felt comfortable being like, okay, I can send a cart down with a box of 12 knives down to your room and feel okay. So we went through that training of like what that looks like. Can you open this link here? It says Cooking Lending Library. Okay. And so you've already seen this. I'm going to do one more thing before we go back to this. So if you can go back to the slide, we'll go to the next slide would be great. Okay, so this is what we call that professional development. This was last fall. We call it Cooking Up Community. And this is the goals that we set for the teachers and staff who came. You can read this, but it's like, we want you to be able to create a safe and enjoyable cooking environment for you and your group, and how to maintain a food safe space, help them know what the tools and equipment were that they can borrow in the loan process, brainstorm ways to utilize the cooking in their classes and programming, because they might say like, I would like to use this, but I don't know how. And then help us understand what they need and what their goals are in their classes and programming. So we might be able to give suggestions of like, oh, you could use this for this thing. So that's this was the goals of the event. And we did 2 sessions. So the first was really just getting familiar with the space, each other, the equipment. And then the second session, we got more into the logistics of how they wanted to use it in their space. But these were the goals that we used for the event. If you go to the next slide. This is a survey we gave to them before it was a Google survey. So I just pulled the questions here before they got started, so we would have some ideas of who was coming and why. So you can see like, what subjects or programs are you hoping to use the equipment with? Like, do you have any goals yet, or anything else that would be good to know about that before they got started? And they might not have anything yet, but they might already have some strong ideas of what they want to do. And so we had about, I don't know, 20 people come, and they're from math and history and English and wellness and sports coaches and all sorts of things. After school enrichment come for the trainings, which was really great. And I ran it with the co-farm to school coordinator, and our interns helped support as well. If you go to the next page. And so this is what the process looks like. After they went through the training, they got a kitchen lending library card. You saw that maybe on the first or second slide was an example of one, and the interns made them, and they're adorable. So they have like a membership to the cooking club. And then when they want to use the equipment after they went through that training, we're like, okay, you've done this. We feel comfortable that you know the expectations, and I'll show you the documents of what that looks like. They fill out this Google survey, and this goes to me and the interns. When do you want to cook? What room do you want your equipment dropped off at? What are you going to use it for? How many? And then I'll go to this doc where they request their form. I'll show you that in a moment. We have gift cards. So do you want us to give you a gift card so you can go buy the ingredients? Do you want us to go to the store to buy you ingredients? Whatever is easiest for the teachers. We want to make that happen. And then we have carts, and we roll all of it down to their space or wherever that is for the day that they're doing that thing. So this is kind of the form or process we use after they've gone through the training and have their membership card.
And Anna, these are students who are doing this. I mean, is this extra work for you that you're doing this in your day, or your students are, and then are you grocery shopping in addition to your already big
So
teaching?
yeah, so just to clarify this, so the people who fill out this form are teachers, maybe a math teacher or a science teacher, whoever, or a wellness after school program that wants to borrow the equipment for their programming. And then I get this in the farm to school interns, and during our class, whether that's in school format, which we have now, or the out of school after school format, which we used to have, then we look at these and pull things together for them. So it's part of that programming. Does that make
Part of
sense?
the credit class.
Yeah, so we're managing it. Yeah. And then if you could, that link that we're going into the cooking, lending, library equipment request form, you can even, that you just had open, that we've been looking at, that had everything in, I can drop that in. So this is the form that is linked on that slide you set in the Google form. So they get this, they go through and check off all the things that they want, and the amount, you can see in parentheses how many we have. And then if there's a size, like I think that only really applies to the gloves, but and then that's our order form that they put in the Google survey, so we know what to pull for them. And then we just ask them, and you can kind of see in the 1 through 4 text at the top of this, we ask them because it explains that process. When they get it, they just mark off that they received it. And then when we get it back, we mark off that it was returned. And so this is how we do that, is they pick what they need from our library. And this is always, I make them make a copy because we're always getting new stuff, our amounts are changing. And so I need a flexible document. And so I need them to have the most recent one. So if I just had the form set to them, like that's changing all the time. So I want them to make a copy of what it currently looks like. And then they give it back to us. And then
Do
they
they-
go do their programming.
Do they wash everything before they return it to you?
So they come up to this room 246, and we have a dishwasher, and they load it and run it. But if they're strapped, again, they can talk to us and we can make that happen too, just because we have the capacity to do that. Yeah. So, it's a simple system, maybe, I don't know, but that's how we're doing it. And so, for instance, I had a math teacher last week use it for one of her classes around ratios and things like that, for they did like some baked goods sort of thing. So they used that for that. Different Spanish classes have used it. The Math 400 class uses it. Some of our advisory classes for just enrichment team building want to use it. And so we said, we have all this equipment that we're using for all this programming. How can we, feel comfortable, one, loaning it out to make sure everyone's food safe and thinking about those things. And how do we make sure we're managing that well? We've expanded that this year. We have, and this is a partnership with our school library. So if you click on that Cooking Up community link up here, that hyperlink, that goes to our school website, and you'll see something for our library, and you'll see something that looks like this, that screen that I just showed you. Just taking a moment. And if you scroll down just a little bit, you'll see on the second here, it says Cooking Up community tools. So these are things that a lot of our math teachers sign out, that are fraction measuring spoons and fraction measuring cups that they could use for cooking and their tools in their class. And then if you scroll down, we added to it a book library that we have that are themed around cooking and things like that. So you can see or different cultures or thing. We try to have diverse representation. But I think there's 50 or 60 books in there that people can sign out to use for their classes that might support cooking and enrichment in their programming. And again, so we can sit down and consult with folks. If you remember that document I showed, the Math 400, I'll sit down with people sometimes and say, okay, what's your class and what are your goals? And then I might recommend, okay, this would be a book that might work well for your class, or, this might be something you want to check out to help support that work. So we have our Cooking Up community books that are all different cookbooks or different food themed events or things like that. And again, if you click on the view more, if you open that up, there's just the list of all the titles that we have here. So that was a partnership with our librarian, Amy Spence, who is amazing. So like clam bake, a Wampanoag tradition. And if you keep scrolling, there's all sorts of stuff that we have in here to support that work. And we're adding to that all the time.
This is incredible.
Yeah.
And we have a Mass Farm to School has a book list in our Harvest of the Month newsletter. We always send out books. So I'm going to look at this list and maybe we can add some of these titles.
Yeah. Yeah, so yeah, we want to make we want food education to be in as many classes as possible. So making sure people have the resources and supports to do that, help coach them to see where it might fit in their curriculum, and add the rest resources, whether it's food or books. Or so for instance, you can see this one, Pies from Nowhere. There's an 8th grade English teacher. They focus on the civil rights movement. They're going to read this book that they learned about through the lending library, and then they're going to make pies as a civil action sort of movement, as a fundraiser that's used this, and kind of look how we can use food as a way to make social change, and raise funds. So that's just an example of one thing that's there. So that's the addition to the library. So we have the equipment piece, and then we have the library piece too.
This is incredible.
Yeah. Okay, next slide, I guess. So talking about funding, because that's always the thing in the room. Like, remember I started this and it was just like bringing in a food processor from my house. So sometimes I see things that other people do. I'm like, I could never do that. And but it's possible. So when we started, I did a lot of individual things through Donor Choose. And if you remember the slide with the kits that were color coded, that's how we got all of the things for that. And then have been able to get the Whole Foods Foundation grant to get some of our equipment. Mass Ag in the Classroom does small grants I've gotten through there. Pilot Light is a program that if you're a teacher, I'd consider doing. They have a year-long fellowship you can apply for, and they support you in starting to bring more food education in your classroom, and they help with funding, and they can connect you with chefs that will come to your room or your Zoom that help with that work as well. And then some of it's been through the Summer DESE grants. I can't remember the actual name of it, but we've had some of that enrichment funds for our summer camps, and I've been able to do things for that have also helped with our programming wider scale. And some of these I write myself, and then sometimes I have help we have through our grant funding department, and a lot of schools don't have that. But if your school has someone that writes grants, or your district, go find them and tell them that you need your help, because that's a big lift if you have to do it yourself. I've been doing that for a while, and so it's been nice this year to be able to have someone else help me. Yeah, and so these are some links. Again, you all have access to this. So it has the cooking signs if that's helpful to modify. Some of our inventory we're starting to do. That's the big thing, is it like just making sure you know where your equipment is once you have a bunch, and having to update that. This 1E, actually, we have a few moments. So if you want to open that one up, I know that third one there, the nice safety thing. This again might be a helpful resource for people. You can modify, but you can see, like I had said before, we project the cleanup. And so this is kind of what that looks like for students, if it's helpful. Sometimes I think setting our routines and our structures is the most stressful thing. And so like, here's an example of what that looks like for students, and we practice and training on that. So if that's helpful in any way. But in here, if you click through, you'll see it has all of our beginning knife safety trainings and some of our signage. So if any of that's helpful at all, you'll see that there. It looks like we're kind of to the end of these slides, but towards the beginning ones, if you go, it goes over all the different knife safety and signage there, and how we do the different cuts. And the videos we use in here is kind of some of the slides we use for teachers too. And then they have access to these slides to share with their students when they're doing their workshop. So we have students and teachers, they project this in their classes that they're going to, and we give them these resources when they're doing that. So that's there if it's helpful for anyone. So this is used for multiple purposes. And if you escape out of that, we can kind of go back to that one thing with doc. I think there's one more thing I wanted to show that's in there. So the planning doc is in there if that's helpful for how we do our collaborations. So that fourth one down, if I sit down with a teacher or someone who wants to do cooking in their classroom and they're not quite sure, so that's there too. Some of the notes from our training we did. And then the cooking lending library guide, if you could open that one up. This is a work in progress, but this is the thing that we're working on to give us kind of the manual, and our next steps people who went to the training that one time are trained, but what about new teachers coming in? Or, when there's turnover or new people are interested, how do we do that? So we want to have a manual, but also we'd like to do an online training with videos, and like maybe an ed puzzle format. So we know that people have watched them, and some questions to answer, so that they don't always have to wait for the training that happens once a year, that they can jump on to this process whenever. So that's kind of our next steps here. But you'll see here, like here are some of our guidelines or things that we go over when we do our training. We provide them with sample forms that they could email out or share with their students and families about what they're doing, and like different feedback. So there's different samples on here. And then if you keep scrolling, there's just some things about, again, you can see the sample form that we use for food systems that people can use around the food safety and preferences. And if you scroll down, the other thing, and here's a list of our inventory again for staff to use in the cooking setup. And so this is still a very working document, but some images that are helpful. But what we're doing is, because every skill we think needs to be explicitly taught. If the teacher is working with a zester or a peeler, that needs to be done. So making sure we have binders now with these images in it, and we're trying to make sure that the images are representative of all of our students. So that's really important when we're picking images, but any diagram that might help, or little videos that might help if they're doing those sorts of things. You can see this here, but then later you'll see things of like how to chop an onion, and stuff like that. So how to break an egg, how to measure flour, so that if a staff member is doing that, they could flip to that page in the binder with kids and have it on their table for them to see, as well as projected on the board. So I'll show this. If you just scroll just a little farther down, I can show some of those ones, but these are kind of knife cut examples. That's an activity we do with them, but here's an example. So this might be a page that we give to staff members if they're using dry and wet ingredients. It's a quick thing that students can look at to go over what those are. So we have pages like this in binders that we have made, and we keep adding, like, how do you know measurements, or how can you approximate? So a lot of that stuff, to try and make it as easy as possible for students and things like that. So that's there, measuring tablespoon and teaspoon, how to use the stoves and what the different heats make. So we have these resources available for anyone who wants to borrow them, and we're adding pages all the time. So here's the how to cut an onion, so they can reference those pages, because again, we want to not assume what people know how to do or not do. So corn, how to crack an egg. So those are some, and we're adding to that, but that's kind of our next step in our library. So I think that's all I got. I got one more slide, or 2 minutes over, but it has some links to some resources that have been helpful for us, and a shout out to the Food Literacy Act to get more of this in our rooms. So you can see information about there, how you might help. Pilot Light with the fellowship that can help really support this process. The Edible Schoolyard, such a great resource. Their Cooking with Curiosity curriculum is where we have gotten a lot of our stuff from. And then if you're interested more in any of the programming that we do at our school, I have from the Mass Farm to Sea last year, the interns, a video, and then one I did about one of the classes that I teach. And there's my email if you want to connect more. And obviously Mass Farm to School is amazing, so you can check them out there as well. And so Anna, if you want to, or Dinah, you can unmute or share one idea, strategy, or thinking you want to remember. Go for it.
Well, I'm just so impressed, Anna. I was a social studies teacher for 20 years. And if this had been, I never had this, and I always wanted to cook, and I just couldn't cook, and my students wanted to cook, and it just never could be part of my curriculum because it was impossible to cook in my classroom. And if I had had this, I would have cooked a lot, because it's such a great way to engage students in looking at history and culture. So I love that you have this. I love how easy it is for other educators in your building. It's incredible how easy it is for them to get involved and have the support they need. And I love the use of your students as a way to spread this in the school and have students really leading the way in this. This is incredible. What a resource for your school.
Thank you. One of my bigger visions, we applied for a grant recently, didn't get it, but hopefully we'll keep it going, is do a training like this for any schools or staff, not just at our school, and that people would leave with a starter kit if they don't have one already, with a cooktop and an induction stove and a cutting board and a knife, and like the things to start with a demo, and then thinking about how we might have regional hubs that are doing something like this scaled up. So you know, again, how can a region of schools have access to something like this? And maybe that exists already, and I don't know. I'd love to learn more about that. But so like you're saying, if people want to have access and don't have the funds, how can we collaborate? Because you're probably not cooking every day unless you're a very dedicated class to that. So if it's, you know, 3 or 4 times a semester, and you like how can we pool our resources as regions to make this happen for everyone, and not have it be some people have that and some people don't, and that access and equity across schools. Cool.
I'm going to stop the recording and
Yeah.
stop.
Anna, hopefully you're there and you had learned something. I don't know.